The signal came in pieces. That was the first wrong thing. A distress call from a colony world was supposed to be clean, loud, full of coordinates and casualty numbers and a list of what was needed: medical supplies, food, evacuation capacity. That was how it always worked. The Galactic Concord had handled 412 distress calls in the last 30 years, and every single one of them had followed that pattern. A problem, a list, a solution. This one came in fragments. The first fragment arrived at Concord Monitoring Station, or L9, at 3:47 Standard Time. It was 17 seconds long. It contained a colony identification code, Vethoran, mixed species settlement, primarily Korath, population 412, and the opening sequence of a standard distress header. Then it cut off. The second fragment arrived 4 minutes later, 8 seconds, the middle portion of a message, words in Korath without beginning or end. The translator pulled what it could: structures asterisk, asterisk something in the walls, cannot reach asterisk. The third fragment arrived 11 minutes after that. 4 seconds. No words. Sound. Liaison Officer Keth of the Velorian Diplomatic Corps was on duty rotation at Orel 9 when the fragments came in. He was a small creature by galactic standards, feathered, hollow-boned, built by his home world for efficiency rather than endurance. He had been a diplomatic liaison for 9 years. He had processed distress calls before. He was good at the work because he did not let himself feel the weight of it while he was doing it. Feeling came later at home, quietly, where it couldn't slow anything down. He listened to the first fragment and began filling out the standard aid request form. He listened to the second fragment and flagged it for a senior officer review. He listened to the third fragment and stopped. He played it again. 4 seconds of sound. It was not static. It was not equipment malfunction. It was not a voice exactly, though it moved the way voices moved. It had rhythm. It had pattern. It rose and fell with something like intention. But it was wrong in a way Keth could not put into language. It was the sound of something that had learned to imitate music by studying the spaces between notes. It was almost correct. The almost was the problem. He sat with it for a moment. Then he filed the aid request form, flagged the audio fragment for analysis, and sent a priority request to Concord Command for an emergency response convoy, medical frigates, food transports, 1 escort vessel, armed because protocol required it when a colony was reporting structural damage of unknown origin. He did not know then that humans had received the same signal. He found out 40 minutes later when the asterisk UNS Relentless filed a jump request. Keth had seen human vessels before. He had been briefed on them as part of his diplomatic training. The briefings always included the same information delivered in the same careful tone that institutions use when they want to be accurate and tactful simultaneously. Humans were Deathworlders. Their home planet, a dense, high-gravity, biologically aggressive rock called Earth, had spent 4 billion years trying to kill every living thing on it. And in response, the living things had gotten very good at not dying. Humans were the result of that process. Dense-muscled, high cortisol, with a pain tolerance that most species found medically implausible, and a set of instincts that had never quite caught up to the fact that they now lived in a galaxy with no apex predators larger than themselves. They were also, in Keth's professional experience, exhausting. The asterisk UNS Relentless was a Goliath-class battlecruiser. This was a category of vessel that the Concord did not build, had never built, and had never formally asked humans to stop building because the conversation had been deemed too politically complicated. It massed 3 times what a standard Concord military escort massed. Its weapon arrays were visible from 200 kilometers. It was not built for comfort or efficiency or diplomatic nuance. It was built for the kind of situations that the Galactic Concord preferred to believe did not exist. It had filed a jump request to Vethoran's coordinates. The Concord control officer on duty denied it in 11 minutes, citing Protocol 7 Alpha. Aid operations proceed under humanitarian convoy structure. Military escalation requires committee review. Review period no less than 72 hours. The humans filed a formal protest. Then they jumped anyway. Keth received his assignment 1 hour later. He was to board the Asterisk Unce Relentless as a conquered observer. He was to document all human actions for the formal review that would certainly be required afterward. He was to ensure that human forces operated within the bounds of conquered humanitarian protocol. The officer who delivered this assignment did not meet Keth's eyes when she said it. That told him something. He packed his kit. He took the shuttle to the Asterisk Relentless docking bay. The docking bay was the size of a small city block. It smelled of metal and something chemical and something organic that he could not identify. Human crew members moved through it in the easy, unhurried way of people who lived inside something enormous and had stopped noticing. One of them, very large, darker-skinned, with what humans grew on their faces called a beard, looked at Keth when he came through the airlock, looked him up and down once and said, "You the liaison?" "Yes," Keth said. "Liaison Officer Keth, Valorian Diplomatic Corps. I am here to observe and document." "Ramos," the man said, "Chief Engineer, you want coffee?" Keth did not know what coffee was. He said no. Ramos shrugged like this was a small tragedy and led him through corridors that were, if anything, even more overwhelming than the docking bay. The ship hummed. Not the way Valorian vessels hummed. Those were quiet and efficient and almost apologetic about the energy they consumed. The Relentless hummed the way a very large animal breathes, like it was doing it on purpose, like it knew you could feel it. "The captain wants to see you," Ramos said. "Fair warning, she's listening to the signal again." The distress signal. The weird part at the end. Keth understood then that the humans had not just received the signal. They had found the same thing he had found in it, the part that was wrong. "How many times has she listened to it?" he asked. Ramos thought about it. "Since we filed the jump request, 20, maybe 30 times." They walked in silence after that. The bridge of the Asterisk Relentless was not what Keth had expected. He had imagined something aggressive, loud, heavily lit, full of the kind of deliberate military display that species use to signal dominance. Instead, it was focused. Quiet in the way that a room full of very alert people is quiet. Every station was occupied. Every screen showed data. The crew moved when they needed to and were still when they didn't. Captain Sierra Voss stood at the central display. She was not tall for a human. She was not built the way Ramos was built, no obvious mass, no size that announced itself. She was the kind of person you could miss in a crowd until she turned around, at which point you understood that missing her had been an error. She wore her dark hair short. She had the kind of stillness that was not relaxation. She was looking at a waveform on the display, the waveform of the 4-second audio fragment. She did not look up when Keth entered. "Liaison Officer Keth," she said. Her voice was even. "I've been informed of your assignment. You're welcome on my bridge as long as you don't touch anything and don't speak when I'm speaking." "Understood, Captain. I would like to note for the record that the Asterisk Relentless jumped without conquered authorization, in violation of." "Noted," she said. She still hadn't looked at him. Keth decided to note it again in his report and leave it there for now. He watched her study the waveform. She played the fragment, 4 seconds, the wrong music. She did not react to it the way Keth had reacted, with a kind of instinctive pulling back, a feather ruffling that he'd had to suppress. She listened to it the way a professional listener listens to something they are trying to understand, clinically, repeatedly, looking for structure. She played it again. A junior officer at a nearby station said, quietly, "Still no matches in the xenobiology database, Captain." "I know," Voss said. "I'm not looking for what it is. I'm looking at how it moves." Keth did not know what that meant. He wrote it down. She played it one more time. Then she turned not to Keth, past him, and raised her voice just enough to reach the back of the bridge. Ramos. Captain. You listened to it on the way up. Yep. Thoughts. There was a pause. Keth turned. Ramos was leaning in the doorway with a large cup of the substance he'd offered earlier, and his expression was the one humans made when they were deciding how to say a simple thing in a way that didn't sound insane. It's looking for something, Ramos said. The signal, the sound. It's like a probe, like something sent it out to feel around and see what it found. The bridge was quiet. And it found a colony of 400 people, Voss said. Yeah, Ramos drank from his cup. Yeah, that's about where I landed too. Voss turned back to her display. She pulled up the colony's last known structural maps, the population records, the resource inventory. She began overlaying sensor parameters, what the asterisk Relentless would be looking for when they arrived. Keth watched her build the picture with the focused efficiency of someone who was not preparing to help so much as preparing to fight, and the distinction between those two things sat in his chest like something cold. Captain, he said, and tried to keep his voice diplomatic. The Concord aid convoy will arrive at Vethorin approximately 12 hours after we do. At that point, standard humanitarian protocol. 12 hours is a long time, Voss said. She did not say it as a challenge. She said it the way you state a fact you wish were not true. She played the fragment one more time. 4 seconds, the wrong music, the sound of something reaching. Keth wrote in his report, human forces appear to have drawn a tactical conclusion from the audio fragment that Concord analysts have not yet formalized. Nature of conclusion unclear. The captain has listened to the fragment approximately 35 times, and her expression has not changed once. He paused. Then he added, I find this more alarming than I expected to. The Relentless jumped to Vethorin 3 hours later. Keth stood on the bridge and watched the stars restructure themselves around a planet that looked, from this distance, completely calm. The colony's lights were visible on the night side, small and steady, burning the way lights burn when the power grid is running and nobody has turned anything off. Nobody had turned anything off. Keth thought about what that meant for a moment. Then he thought about it again. Voss ordered a full sensor sweep. She did not order a hail. She did not begin standard contact protocol. She stood at her display and she waited for the data, and when the first readings came back, she looked at them for a long moment before saying anything. Biomass distribution is wrong, the sensor officer reported. Reading organic mass across the settlement structures. Dispersal pattern doesn't match population distribution. It's a pause. It's like the biomass is in the walls. Nobody spoke. Then the communications board lit up. A transmission, encrypted, broken, barely holding together across whatever was disrupting the colony's systems. Voice, Korath vocal patterns, which the translator rendered in flat, careful words. Don't come down. 3 words. Voss looked at the transmission log. She looked at the biomass readings. She looked at the 4-second waveform still sitting in the corner of her display. Combat stations, she said, we're going down. Keth opened his mouth. Closed it. Wrote in his report, the captain has made a decision. I do not yet have the information to evaluate. I am beginning to believe this may describe most of what she does. The settlement looked like a photograph of itself. That was the only way Keth could describe it afterward, when he was trying to explain to the review board what had felt wrong before anything had confirmed that something was wrong. It looked like Vethorin colony was supposed to look, the low, rounded architecture that Korath builders preferred, the communal growing structures on the eastern perimeter, the lights still burning in the central dome. From the shuttle window, descending through thin cloud, it looked like a place where 412 people lived. It looked like that very precisely and very completely. And it did not move. No one came out to see the shuttle land. No emergency figures in the open square. No faces at the dome windows. The growing structures were still. No automated irrigation cycling, which should have been running at this hour. Even the wind looked wrong, blowing dust across paths that should have had foot traffic to clear them. A place where people lived looked used, worn at the edges, random. This was not random. Sergeant Adiz Cole was first out of the shuttle, which was her job and also, Keth suspected, her genuine preference. She was not the largest Marine on the team. That was a man named Park who carried a weapon platform that Keth's briefing materials had described as vehicle grade without apparent irony. But she moved like she had been having arguments with her environment her entire life and had never lost one. 7 Marines behind her. Then Voss. Then Keth, who had insisted on accompanying the ground team on the grounds that it was his observational mandate, and had spent the shuttle descent regretting this. The air on Vethorin smelled like soil and something sweet, growing things. Keth noted this because it was the most normal thing present. "Spread and check," Cole said, and the Marines moved. They were quiet. Keth had expected them to be loud. He had a Deathworlder briefing in his head that emphasized aggression, forward momentum, the overwhelming of resistance through force. What he saw instead was patience. They checked corners. They communicated in small hand signals. They tested doors before opening them. They were, he realized slowly, behaving less like soldiers and more like something cautious and very experienced that had learned the difference between strength and recklessness through whatever cost that lesson usually demanded. Voss walked the central path with her hands loose at her sides and her eyes moving across everything with the same focused calm she'd had on the bridge. She had a sidearm. She hadn't drawn it. "Nothing," Cole reported from the East Block. "No bodies, no damage, furniture's in place, food was being prepared, stoves are still on actually." "Turn them off," Voss said. "Captain," that was Ewan from the northern residential block. His voice was level, which Keth was learning to interpret as the human tone that meant the opposite of fine. "I've got something." They crossed to him in 30 seconds. The wall was white, or it had been. Now it was white with the faint outline of something pressed into its surface. An impression, like a shape had been pushed into clay and then the clay had hardened. The shape was roughly the size and outline of a Koreth adult. 4 limbs. A recognizable silhouette, standing against the wall as if it had been placed there, or as if it had pressed itself against the wall in the last moment of something, and the wall had accepted it. There were 6 more in the same room. Keth looked at them. His translator was not necessary to understand what he was seeing, but some part of his brain was insisting on the processing anyway, trying to file this into a category. Structure damage, unusual mineral deposit, something with a geological explanation, something that was not what it looked like. It looked like people had been absorbed into the wall. "Sir," Ewan said. He was looking at his scanner. "The biomass reading from the sensor sweep, I think I know what it was." Nobody asked him to explain. The walls around them explained it. Back on the asterisk Relentless, Keth had requested a private channel to submit an update to Concord Command. He was composing this update in his head, standing in the residential block, staring at the wall when Voss spoke. "Keth, Captain, you've gone very still." "I am processing," he said. "Good instinct." She turned from the wall and looked at her team. Nobody touched the surfaces, walk center of path, full body seals, gloves on. She tapped her comm. "Relentless, are you getting this feed?" "Full receive, Captain." That was the voice of Lieutenant Dara Osai, bridge duty officer. "We're already running the imprint profiles against xenobiology. No match. Whatever left these impressions, we don't have a record of it." "It's not in the database because nobody survived to report it," Voss said. It was not a question. Osai was quiet for a moment. "That is one interpretation, yes." "Start building me a strike solution for the central dome." She said this the way a person orders lunch. Don't commit to it, just have it ready. Keth turned toward her before he could stop himself. A strike solution. Captain, there are survivors in this colony, the transmission. I know exactly how many there are, Voss said. I'm working on keeping it that number. She walked away. Keth stood in the middle of the path, center of the room as instructed, and looked at the shapes in the walls, and tried to stop doing the calculation he was doing about how many shapes he had counted so far across 3 buildings, and how that number related to the colony's population. He stopped trying. He started counting instead. They found Governor Yissel in the agricultural storage facility on the colony's south perimeter, the building furthest from the central dome, buried under 6 layers of sealed containers, the air inside thick with the chemical smell that Keth had been unable to identify from outside. She was Korath, which meant she was roughly humanoid in the Concord's loose usage of that term. 4 limbs, bilateral symmetry, a chitinous outer layer that went from dark brown at her crown to pale gold at her joints. She was also, clearly, the kind of person who made decisions when there was no better option. She had sealed herself in with 12 survivors. The chemical smell was coming from what she'd built, a mixture of agricultural compounds, some kind of fertilizer base, mineral extract, sprayed across every surface and soaked into the cloth they'd wrapped themselves in. She had a makeshift applicator in her hands when the Marines opened the hatch, and she had it pointed at Cole before Cole had finished saying the word friendly. Human, Yissel said. She looked past Cole, she looked at all of them. You brought weapons. Yes, Cole said. Real ones. Yes, ma'am. Something happened in Yissel's face. Keth's translator was not built for Korath microexpressions. The system had been designed for language, not for the exact quality of relief that crosses a face when the thing you asked for has actually arrived. He didn't need the translator. I didn't think anyone would come with weapons, she said. What is that chemical? Voss asked. She had come through behind the Marines and was looking at the sprayer in Yissel's hands with focused attention. Agricultural base. Nitrogen compound, mineral traces, organic binder. Yissel lowered the sprayer. She was very tired, Keth realized. Not the tiredness of a long day, the kind that takes up residence. It doesn't like organic compounds it can't read. If your surface chemistry is complex enough, different enough from what it's been eating, it moves on. Voss said. We called it the Pale Choir, in the last communications before the relay went down. Yissel looked at the floor. It came from the East Settlement, that's where it started. We didn't understand what it was until it had already, she stopped. There were 412 of us. There are 340 now, Voss said, including your group. Yissel looked up. I counted the imprints, Voss said, simply, without apology or softness because neither would have helped anything. 72 impressions across 14 structures. That leaves 340 alive. You have 12 here, which means there are 328 more in the colony who are still surviving by some method. Where? Keth watched Yissel take, in the fact that this human had done that accounting before entering the building. The dome, Yissel said. Central dome, they barricaded. I don't know if they're still. They are, Voss said. Thermal readings show living bodies. We're getting them out. She turned to Cole. Route through the west alleys. Keep the agricultural perimeter between us and the dome until I say otherwise. Captain, Keth said, and then had a brief internal argument with himself about whether to continue. He continued. The Pale Choir is still active in the central dome. Yes, Yissel said. And you want to walk toward it. It was Yissel who answered, not Voss. The Korath governor looked at Keth with the expression of someone who has decided that the people in front of them are the reason they are still alive, and that this means something. The Concord sent an aid convoy to a Valorian outpost 8 months ago, Yissel said. After an attack, the convoy had medical supplies, food, evacuation transports. She paused. There were no survivors. The storage facility was very quiet. "I know," Keth said, because he did know. It was in the incident record, classified partial. He had read it, and what he had not known before this moment was that this specific fact was why the asterisk Relentless had jumped. Voss had known 8 months ago that a Valorian outpost convoy had sent distress signals. She had heard those signals. She had listened to them the way she listened to the Vethoran signal, repeatedly, clinically, looking at how it moved, and she had started preparing. He looked at the captain's back as she talked through the extraction route with Cole. He thought she already knew what she was coming to. He thought she has been building the plan since before the signal. He opened his report document and stared at what he'd written. Human forces appear to have drawn a tactical conclusion. He deleted appear to have drawn. He wrote, human forces had already drawn a tactical conclusion from a prior event 6 months before this colony was attacked. The battlecruiser was not a response to this crisis. It was a response to the pattern the crisis belongs to. I did not understand this distinction before arriving on the surface. He paused. I am not certain the Conquered understands this distinction either. They found the dome survivors barricaded behind 6 layers of Korath-style pressure doors, which were not designed for this and had held anyway, which said something about what fear could motivate even in species not known for physical resilience. 328 people, hungry, exhausted, several injured, all alive. The Marine named Park stood in the dome entrance while the evacuation proceeded, watching the walls, and his expression was the blank professional one that Keth was learning to read as asterisk extremely alert and choosing not to show it. The walls were white. The walls were intact. The walls did not move. Cole's voice in Keth's earpiece. Captain, movement in the upper infrastructure, above the dome ceiling. Voss, what kind? Cole, slow, dispersed like it's spreading. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Voss, it knows we're here. Cole, yes ma'am. Voss, faster on the extraction. The Marines started moving survivors in groups of 20. Keth helped. He was not a soldier, but he had hands, and the presence of a calm adult was useful to frighten people regardless of species, and he found that this was something he could do. He guided. He translated when the Korath survivors didn't understand English instructions. He kept his voice steady. He was passing through the dome's main corridor with a group of survivors when the lights above them shifted. Not flickered. Shifted. The way light shifts when something passes between the source and the surface. The corridor should have been clear above them. It was not clear above them. Something pale moved through the space between the light panels and the ceiling with a slow, searching motion that did not have a good anatomical reference in any file Keth had ever read. It was distributed. It was everywhere at once in the way that fog is everywhere at once. It was pale and it sang, 4 seconds, 8 seconds, the wrong music that didn't stop this time. Keth heard a survivor behind him make a sound and say something in Korath that the translator gave him as, "It's found us." He did not run. He was surprised by this. His body wanted to run, and some other part of him, the professional part, the part that had processed 412 distress calls and understood that panic was its own casualty, overruled it. "Move," he said clearly. "Walk fast that way." He kept his body between the survivors and the ceiling. The Marines appeared at both ends of the corridor. "Eyes up," Cole said, and her voice was calm in the way of still water over fast current. "Don't look at it, move." They moved. Behind Keth, the corridor wall began to show the faint impression of something pressing through it from the other side. Slow, patient, like it had all the time it needed. They got out. Everyone in that group got out. Keth filed this under. Things he would think about later in private when his hands stopped shaking. The last survivor group cleared the dome with 4 Marines as rear guard. Voss was at the shuttle, counting. Keth saw her counting. She had a number in her head and she was verifying it, and something about the deliberate care of that, the refusal to assume, to approximate, to let urgency replace accuracy, told him more about her than anything she'd said. 3:40, Cole reported. 3:40, Voss confirmed. She looked at the dome, she looked at her comm, she said to the relentless above them, "Osai, how's that strike solution?" "Ready, Captain." "It's adapted," Voss said, "not to Osai, to herself or to the settlement in general. Or to the thing in the dome that was now pressing against the inside of every surface. It's looked at us and figured out we're different. It's going to try something different now." She was right about this. Keth did not know then how right she was. What she meant was, the Pale Choir had spent all its time in Vethoran meeting species that did not fight back. What she meant was, it had just met something new. "Get everyone to the shuttle," Voss said. "We're going up." She was the last one in. She did not run. Above the dome, something pale and dispersed began to move, not toward the settlement, but up, following the heat signatures of the shuttles, doing something it had never needed to do before. Reaching toward space. The conquered fleet arrived while the Pale Choir was still learning that space existed. 12 ships, Admiral Thal commanding from the Asterisk Meridian Reach, a Merindian vessel, wide and flat, built for the kind of species that had evolved in deep water and still moved like they expected to be surrounded by it. Medical frigates, supply transports, one escort vessel with the armament rating of something that had never expected to fire its weapons. The convoy that had been assembled according to protocol, dispatched according to protocol, and had traveled the correct number of hours at the correct speed because protocol had a process, and the process had a timeline. Thal opened a channel to the Asterisk, relentless, before his fleet had fully completed the jump sequence. "Captain Voss." His translator rendered Merindian in the Conquered standard formal register, flat, official, designed for paperwork rather than conversation. "You are hereby notified that your vessel's unauthorized jump and subsequent unauthorized ground operation are being logged for formal review. You will stand down all active operations and defer to Conquered Humanitarian Command immediately." There was a pause on the channel. "Noted," Voss said. Another pause. "Captain, I expect an acknowledgement of." "I acknowledged it," Voss said. "Noted, I noted it." Thal's translator did not carry frustration well. The flat official register did its best. "The Asterisk Relentless will cease all unauthorized activity in." "Admiral," Voss said, "I have 340 survivors aboard and something that eats people currently learning to operate in vacuum. You can review my logs at your convenience. Right now I need to clear the area around this planet, so if you'd move your fleet back about 40,000 kilometers, I'd appreciate it." The channel went silent. Keth, standing at the back of the bridge, watched Thal's fleet on the display, 12 ships, none of them moving. He looked at Voss. She had already looked away from the communications screen and was back at her sensor display, watching the thing rising from Vethoran's upper atmosphere like smoke that had decided to have opinions. He thought, she is not going to argue with Thal. She is not going to explain herself to Thal. She has something that needs doing and she is going to do it, and the argument will happen afterward with whoever is still alive to have it. He thought, I have spent 9 years in diplomacy learning how to make people understand each other, and I have never been in a room with someone so completely uninterested in being understood. He was not sure yet whether this was a failure. The ground team had been back on the Asterisk, relentless, for 20 minutes when the Pale Choir reached the hull. It did not arrive the way a weapon arrives, fast, loud, decisive. It arrived the way water arrives in a low room, slowly, finding the edges, occupying available space before the room realizes it should have been concerned. The outer sensor array registered the contact. The contact was soft, almost gentle, like something touching a surface to learn what the surface was. Hull contact, OSI reported. Organic material, distributed. It's spread across sections 4 through 7 outer plating. How much of it? Voss asked. Growing. It's not dense. More like a film. A very thin film, that's Captain. It's changing the readings. The outer temperature sensors are giving us false data anywhere it's covering. Voss looked at this information for a moment. It's blinding us, she said, selectively. It's smart, said Marine Ewan, who had come up to the bridge still in his ground kit. He said it with a flat kind of respect that had nothing fond in it. It's probing, Voss said. Same thing it did with the signal, same thing it did in the colony. It touches things to find out what they are. She looked at the display showing the covered sensor sections. It's going to figure out what we are in about 10 minutes. And then, Keth asked before he could prevent himself. Then it'll decide whether to eat us or leave us alone. She turned to Ewan. Get your team to the outer corridor sections 4 through 7, full suits. Tell them not to touch the hull from inside. And if it comes through, it won't come through. It's still reading us. It gets violent after it understands what it's dealing with. She thought for a moment. Which means we want to be moving before the 10 minutes are up. She turned back to her display. OSI, that strike solution. Ready, Captain. Show me the node concentration maps from the sensor sweep. Before we landed, the biomass distribution. She pulled it up herself, overlaid it with current readings, and began marking points on the display with the focused efficiency of someone solving a problem they had been thinking about for 6 months. The colony's structures were infested at concentration points, the dome ceiling, the wall sections facing east, the original vector. She marked 4 points. Those are the nodes, she said. That's where it's dense enough to damage. The dispersed material, the film on the hull, the traces in the corridors, that's peripheral. It can regenerate from the nodes. You kill the nodes, the peripheral material goes inert. 4 targets, OSI said. 4 targets, precision strike, sequential. I want the intervals tight enough that it can't retreat from one node to reinforce another. She looked at the timeline. We have 8 minutes before it finishes reading us. Strike in 6. Captain, that was Thal's voice back on the channel. He had apparently been listening. His flat, formal register was doing something complicated. I must protest in the strongest. Admiral, Voss said, without looking up from the display. There are 328 survivors still in the colony dome. Silence. You said 340 survivors, Thal said. 340 aboard my ship. 328 were extracted from the dome. The remaining 12 came from agricultural storage, separate location. She was not explaining this for Thal's benefit. She was explaining it because accuracy mattered. The dome survivors were in contact with the pale choir. I need to run a biological sweep before I can confirm they're clean. And if they are not clean? Thal asked. Voss was quiet for one beat. Then we'll cross that bridge. Keth, who had very good hearing and was standing close to Thal's channel feed, heard something in the Admiral's translator output that was usually filtered out, the Merindian vocalization underneath the standard register. It was a low sound, something between a hum and a word. His own translator gave him, tentatively, afraid. The Marine who went down was named Corporal Fen Liu. She was in the outer corridor of Section 5 when the pale choir shifted behavior. It stopped the gentle probing and tried something different. It pushed. Not physically. There was no impact, no breach. It pushed through whatever mechanism it used to interface with nervous systems, the same mechanism it had used in the colony, reaching through the ship's outer hull with something that was not radio, and was not chemical, and was not exactly anything that the Concord's xenobiology database had ever named. Liu hit the corridor wall, not because she fell, because she sat down against it in the middle of her stride, and her eyes went somewhere that wasn't the corridor. Liu, said the Marine behind her. She didn't answer. She was looking at something that wasn't there. Her face was doing the thing faces do when they are somewhere else completely, when the body is in one place and the person inside it is in another. She was looping. Keth learned this word afterward. The pale choir's probe had caught the edge of her consciousness and was cycling it, playing it back, looking for the information it contained. What it found was a human nervous system at full activation. Humans at maximum stress did not calm down. They did not detach. They produced a cascade of chemistry that the choir apparently had never encountered in any species. It had previously contacted cortisol and adrenaline in concentrations that Keth's physiology would have found medically dangerous. Combined with a pain processing structure that was not suppressed by the probe but was, instead, fighting it. Liu's hands had clenched into fists on the floor. Her jaw was locked. She was arguing with the thing inside her nervous system in the only language a body knows, which is resistance. She wasn't winning, but she wasn't losing either. The choir withdrew. Not far. It pulled back from Liu. She gasped hard, like surfacing, and then it paused. Keth could not see this, but Osai was reading it on the external sensors. The hull contact in Section 5 had thinned, concentrated, moved. "It's pulling back from Section 5, Osai said, concentrating in 4 and 6. "It burned its probe on her," Cole said. She was next to Liu now, checking her. "Got a good look at what we're running and didn't like what it saw." "How is she?" Voss's voice on the comm was immediate. "Shaken, confused, she'll be okay." Cole looked at the Section 4 wall, which was showing the faint pale shimmer that meant concentration. "Captain, it's not leaving, it's reorganizing." "I know," Voss said. "Get her clear of that section, all of you clear. You've got 3 minutes. Then from somewhere behind Keth, Ramos, "Captain." Ramos. "Got an idea about the hull problem. You know how the outer plating has the emergency discharge system for static buildup in nebula transit?" A very brief pause. "Yes," Voss said, in the tone of someone whose mind has moved 3 steps ahead. "I can reroute it. Run current through the whole outer plating, controlled pulse. It won't breach the hull, but anything sitting on the outside that's running biological processes will probably find it real unpleasant. Do it 2 minutes." She turned to Osai. "Strike solution, target the 4 nodes. When Ramos runs the hull discharge, the choir is going to flinch. It'll concentrate inward toward the planet. That's when we fire. Sequential strikes, 6-second intervals." She paused. "And get my survivors out of the sweep radius first. I want all 340 of them in the interior sections before we do anything." Thal was back on the channel. He had been listening to all of this. His flat, formal register had developed something rough at the edges. "Captain Voss, the medical frigates can assist with the biological screening of the survivors if—" "Yes," Voss said. "Thank you, Admiral. Stand by to receive." It was the first time she had thanked him for anything. Keth noted this. 7 minutes after the choir withdrew from Corporal Liu's nervous system, and 40 seconds after it had reached what Os called maximum node concentration, all 4 points dense enough to read as solid mass on the sensors, Ramos ran the discharge. The Relentless shuddered, not dramatically, a single, full-body shiver like a large animal shaking off water. The pale film on the outer hull thinned in real time on the sensor display, pulling back, and in the 4 node points on the planet below, something happened that the sensors registered as a rapid shift in mass concentration, not fleeing. Flinching. The way a hand flinches from unexpected heat. 6 seconds. The first strike hit Node 1. Keth did not know what the Relentless's strike weapons looked like from the outside. He had the bridge display, which showed targeting reticles and trajectory data, and energy output in numbers that meant very little to him. What he understood was, the settlement on Vethorin's surface received 4 precisely timed impacts over a span of 24 seconds, and each impact corresponded exactly to one of the 4 concentration points Captain Voss had marked on the display. The pale film on the outer hull went thin. Then it went inert. Then, over the following 4 minutes, it simply stopped being present. I said, hull readings clear. Ramos on the engineering comm said, that's what I thought. Voss looked at the settlement display. The colony structures were standing. The lights were still on, most of them. 3 buildings had taken structural damage from the dispersal of the choir's concentrated mass when it panicked, which was not nothing, but was also not the catastrophic destruction a less precise strike would have caused. Colony status, she said. 3 structures damaged, significant but repairable, power grid holding, agricultural systems mostly intact. Osa paused. Captain, the biomass readings in the walls are dropping. The impressions in the structures, the signatures left by another pause shorter. They're fatting. Whatever the pale choir did to incorporate the colonists into the structures, without the active choir presence to maintain it, the material is reverting. Nobody said what that meant. Voss said it. 72, she said. The impressions are all 72. Not a question. Yes, Captain. The bridge was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when the information present is heavier than anyone wants to speak over. Keth stood at the back of the bridge. He thought about 72 shapes pressed into white walls. He thought about a Valorian outpost 8 months ago that had received an aid convoy and sent back no survivors. He thought about the 4-second audio fragment that Voss had listened to 35 times before they jumped. He opened his report. He wrote, at 11:42 Standard Time, the pale choir entity was neutralized from the Vethoran colony by coordinated orbital strike. Total survivors, 340 of 412. The strike was precise. The strike was prepared for. The captain had the solution built before the ground team landed. He wrote, I am beginning to understand that the battlecruiser was not an overreaction. He stopped. He wrote, I am beginning to understand that the battlecruiser was barely enough. Above Vethoran, the conquered medical frigates moved in to receive survivors for screening. The Relentless held its position, running sensor sweeps in expanding circles, watching for any trace of pale choir activity in the outer atmosphere. Finding none. Not yet. On the hull of the asterisk Relentless, where the pale film had been, there was nothing. Clean metal. Discharge burns barely visible on the outer plating where Ramos had run the current. And in the engineering bay, Ramos was explaining to a very tired Corporal Liu what he'd done, using hand gestures and the frankly unreasonable amount of enthusiasm he brought to every problem he'd ever solved. And Liu was drinking something hot and listening, and at a certain point she laughed, a small, rough sound, and said, You turned the ship into a giant bug zapper. Basically, yeah, Ramos said. Amazing. I thought so. She drank her coffee. Outside the viewport, Vethoran turned slowly in the light of its star, 400 kilometers below, damaged and surviving and still lit up on the night side. Chief Liu said, Yeah. What was it like, inside my head? Ramos thought about this for a moment. His face did the thing faces do when they are being careful. Like static, he said. That's what the bioscan said, not real damage, like a radio getting interference. She nodded. He was not sure she believed him. He was not entirely sure he was being accurate. What the bioscan had actually said was, neural probe attempted. Target nervous system presented atypical resistance profile consistent with acute stress response. Probe appears to have been abandoned rather than withdrawn. Which meant the pale choir had tried to read Corporal Liu's nervous system and had found something in there that it did not want to read twice. Ramos filed this under things he would think about never, because there was no version of thinking about it that ended anywhere comfortable. Get some sleep, he told her. She did. 2 nodes survived. Osai called it out 11 minutes after the last strike, and his voice had the quality of someone delivering information they had hoped would not be true. The sensor readings had looked clean. The biomass traces in the colony structures were fatting. The hull was clear. By every external indicator, the pale choir had been neutralized, which was why it took 11 minutes to notice that 2 of the 4 strikes had impacted concentrated mass that had not been the node itself. Had been, instead, a concentration of mass that the choir had moved into position to absorb the impact while the actual node pulled back. It had used itself as a shield. It had sacrificed part of itself to protect the rest. "Os," I said, "Captain, I'm reading 2 mobile concentrations ascending from the colony's eastern sector. They're not dispersed. They're moving as units." Voss looked at the readings. "In vacuum." "Yes, Captain. Hull temperature differential suggests they're moving through." He paused. "They're generating their own electromagnetic field to propel themselves. Captain, I don't know how that's possible." "It learned it," Voss said. She said it without drama. She said it the way you name a fact that is unpleasant but not surprising. She turned to her weapons officer, Chang, targeting on the 2 concentrations. "Trying, Captain. They're small, very small, moving erratically." Chang was a compact person with the unhurried intensity of someone who had made peace with difficult problems by meeting them directly. "I can get one at distance. The other will be on us before I can reacquire. Then we'll deal with the other one ourselves." She tapped her comm. "Ramos." "Still here, Captain." "That discharge trick you did, can you run it again?" "Yep, but I need 60 seconds to reset the capacitors." "You have 45. I need 60. Ramos." 53. That's the actual number. I didn't want to do it in under 60 because I was worried about the capacitor integrity, but honestly, 53 is fine. 53, Voss said. "Stand by." On the display, 2 pale concentrations moved through vacuum toward the asterisk relentless. They did not move in straight lines. They moved the way things move when they are navigating by sensing what's ahead of them, with small adjustments, patient corrections, the movement of something that has no hurry because it has no concept of losing. The conquered fleet, 40,000 kilometers distant, was watching on sensors. Thal had stopped talking. The entire bridge could feel it, the silence from the conquered channel that meant a fleet of 12 ships was watching something they could not help with and knew they could not help with. The medical frigates had the armament of survey vessels. The escort ship had weapons that had never been fired in combat. The asterisk Meridian Reach itself was built for the deep-water diplomacy of an aquatic world, wide and flat, and deeply unsuited to the kind of problem currently ascending from Vethoran's eastern sector. It was not a flaw in those ships. They were not built for this. No one had built them for this because no one had known this existed. That was the whole problem, Keth thought, standing at the back of the bridge, watching the display. That was the entire thing in miniature. The Conquered had built its fleet for what it knew, and what it knew had been determined by what had survived to report back. The things that nothing survived to report back, those remained unknown. The Relentless had been built for those things. "Target 1, Chang said, acquiring." The concentration in the display moved, adjusted, moved again. "It's trying to use the planet as cover," Chang said, "burning around the orbital angle." "Let it," Voss said. "Track it and wait, it'll have to come to us." She was eating. This was the thing Keth noticed and could not stop noticing. Voss was eating a ration bar at her station, in small methodical bites, her eyes moving between the targeting display and the sensor display with the calm of someone who had been in rooms like this before and had learned that nutrition was a tactical resource. The concentrated node swung around Vethoran's orbital curve. Chang fired. The hit registered. The concentration destabilized, scattered, dispersed, lost coherence. Not dead, maybe, but gone as a functioning unit. One down, Chang said. Second one, Voss asked. 15 seconds out, Ola said. Hull contact in 15 seconds. Ramos. Ready in 4, 3, 2. The Relentless shivered again. Harder this time. Ramos had said 53 seconds and he'd had 51, and the capacitors showed it. A crack in one of the secondary systems that would need repair and was being repaired already, because Ramos had anticipated the crack and had someone standing by for it. The second concentration hit the hull and stopped, dispersed across the outer plating, disorganized by the discharge, and then, slower than before, more careful, began reconcentrating. It's on the hull, Osai said, adapting to the discharge, trying to route around it. Of course it is, Voss said. She looked at the section display. It's on hull section 9. What's directly interior to section 9? Secondary cargo bay. Who's in secondary cargo? Nobody. Cleared it when we brought the survivors in from the dome. It's empty. Open the vents to space in secondary cargo. A beat, Captain, that will. Vent the cargo bay to vacuum, Voss said. The choir is a biological entity. It's reading us through hull vibration and heat signature. If it tries to come through the hull into the cargo bay and the cargo bay is vacuum, it will. Equalize, Ose finished. It'll try to match the pressure on our side. It'll thin itself out trying to push through into nothing. And when it's that thin, hit it with the hull charge again. The cargo bay vented. The hull sensors in section 9 showed the concentration thinning, spreading, trying to fill the pressure differential. Ramos ran the charge. The pale material on the outer hull of section 9 went still. Completely still. Then it began to move differently, not searching, not probing, not reorganizing. It moved the way ash moves after the fire that made it has gone out. Passive, drifting with the ship's minimal momentum. Dead. Hull section 9 clear, Ose said. All hull sections clear. A pause. Captain, I'm running full spectrum sweep. I'm not finding any active pale choir signature in local space or on the planet's surface. The bridge was quiet. Run it again, Voss said. He ran it again. Clear, he said. Voss finished her ration bar, put the wrapper in her pocket, looked at the display showing Vethorin, the two dispersed and inert concentrations in orbit, the colony below with its lights still on. Good, she said. Thal's voice came on the channel 2 minutes later. It had changed. Not dramatically, his translator still rendered everything in the flat official register, because that was what it was built for. But the quality of what the flat official register was carrying was different. It had the feeling of a very formal person trying to decide which formalities still applied. Captain Voss, he said, I would like to request a full transfer of your sensor logs from the time of your arrival. Yes, Voss said, stand by. She sent them, all of them. Every sensor reading from the moment the Relentless dropped out of FTL to the present, the biomass distribution in the colony structures, the hull contact readings, the node concentration maps, the probe attempt on Corporal Liu's nervous system, the behavior shifts after the ground team's presence was registered. The complete record of what the Pale Choir was, what it did, and how it learned. And at the front of the package, time-stamped 6 months earlier, the Valorian Outpost Incident Analysis, the 4-second audio fragment from that incident, which matched the fragment in the Vethorin signal, the Relentless's asterisk xenobiology query from 8 months ago, flagging both signals to the Concord database, which had filed the query and taken no further action. The query that Concord Command had received, had classified as low priority, had not forwarded to threat assessment. Thal read the logs. Or his team read them. Or whatever the Merindian equivalent of reading was, Keth didn't know the specifics. What he knew was that the Concord channel was quiet for 11 minutes, which was a long time for a fleet admiral in the middle of an active event to say nothing. Then Thal said, We received this query. Yes, Voss said. Our database team classified it as a low-confidence anomaly flag. Yes, Voss said. We did not forward it to threat assessment. No, Voss said. Another silence, shorter. How long have you been preparing for this specific entity? We started building the targeting model 6 months ago, Voss said. We've been running simulations on biological dispersal entities for the last 4 months. The specific application to the choir, we locked that in about 2 months back, when we got the spectral analysis on the Valorian outpost wreckage. Thal was quiet for a long moment. You had 2 months, he said finally. Yes. You had 2 months and you did not. He stopped. Why didn't you report this through formal channels? The bridge heard this. Everyone on the bridge heard this. Several people exchanged glances, not mocking. Something more complicated than that. The look of people who know why a thing is true and know the honest answer is going to land badly. Voss answered it anyway, because that was what she did. Because the formal channel response time for a threat classification review at Concord Command is between 45 and 90 standard days, and I wasn't confident we had that long. She said it without apology, without softness, with the directness of someone who has stopped performing patience for institutions that have not earned it. Thal did not respond immediately. Geth, standing at the back of the bridge, thought about the aid convoy that had arrived at the Valorian outpost, the medical frigates, the food transports, the single escort vessel. He thought about what those ships had found or hadn't found because nothing was left to find. He thought about Voss listening to the 4-second fragment 35 times and not changing her face. He understood now what she had been thinking about. Not the choir, the convoy. She had been thinking about the convoy arriving undefended and what would happen to it, and she had decided that under no circumstances was that going to be the outcome she presided over. The survivor transfer took 4 hours. The Concord medical frigates were good at this: screening, treatment, careful biological assessment. They confirmed what Voss had expected. The 340 survivors who had been extracted from Vethorin were clean. No choir residue. No neural probe markers beyond the single incident with Corporal Liu, whose readings the Concord medical team looked at for a long time and described, carefully, as highly anomalous and indicative of a nervous system profile that resisted interference in a manner we have not previously documented. Liu, being informed of this assessment, said, "Cool." The Korath survivors were a different matter, not biologically, but emotionally, which was sometimes worse. 340 people who had spent an unknown number of hours barricaded in a dome, listening to something move through the walls, having no reason to believe that anyone was coming. 12 who had spent that same time in an agricultural storage facility, with a governor who had synthesized a chemical deterrent out of fertilizer and will. They were taken care of. That was the Concord doing what it was built to do, and it did it well, and Keth watched it happen and felt the familiar pride of belonging to something that, at its core, was trying to prevent suffering. The trouble was the suffering it hadn't known to prepare for. Governor Yissel refused the initial medical transport off the Asterisk Relentless. She sat in the ship's main corridor with 12 survivors who had shared the agricultural storage with her, and she waited. She did not explain what she was waiting for. She didn't need to. The survivors were waiting for the same thing, and the Marines who passed through the corridor understood what it was, had seen it before, in extraction operations in other contexts, in other bad situations. And they stepped around the waiting group with the quiet respect of people who recognized stubborn survival when it was sitting in front of them. Voss came through the corridor 3 hours after the transfer began. She stopped when she saw Yissel. Yissel looked at her. "You counted us," Yissel said. "Yes," Voss said. "Before you came down, you already knew how many were left." I needed to know how many I was bringing back up. Yissel was quiet for a moment. Around her, her 12 survivors, all Korath, all wearing the faint chemical residue of Yissel's compound, all looking at Voss with the particular expression of people who had been inside something terrible and had come out the other side to find the thing that pulled them out, were listening. The Conquered sent a convoy to Vethorin colony 3 cycles ago, Yissel said. Small outbreak, mining accident, some injured, infrastructure damage, medical frigates, food transport. They arrived in 6 hours and everyone was fine. Yes, Voss said. That convoy would have killed us. Voss didn't answer. Yissel didn't need her to. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of something they both understood. I sent the SOS, Yissel said. I didn't know who would come, I just sent it and hoped. She looked at her hands, at the chemical staining on them. I hoped someone would come with something real. From behind Voss, Ramos appeared with a tray of food. He had been feeding everyone on his corridor rotation since the survivors came aboard. It was not an assigned task. It was Ramos, and it had produced the situation where roughly 60 survivors had taken up residence in or near the engineering bay, because that was where the food kept appearing. He set the tray down near Yissel's group. He said something that the translator rendered approximately as, "Eat something. It helps." Yissel looked at him. "It does," he said. "I know it doesn't feel like it will. Eat something anyway." She took a piece of food. She ate it. Around her, her survivors did the same, slowly, in the careful way of people who had forgotten that eating was something they were allowed to do. Ramos nodded, satisfied, and went back the way he'd come. Keth, who had followed Voss through the corridor and had witnessed all of this, wrote in his report, Chief Engineer Ramos's contribution to survivor welfare management has been, in the estimation of this observer, significant. His methods are informal. His results are not. He paused. He added, the captain counts her people before she arrives. The engineer feeds them after. I do not know how to evaluate this against Concord Protocol because I do not believe Concord Protocol accounts for it. The damage assessment for Vethorin came in at 1800 Standard Time. 3 structures destroyed in the strike, 22 damaged, agricultural system at 70% capacity, power grid stable. The colony's core infrastructure, the things that would let it function, let people live in it and work in it and rebuild it, was intact. Total lost, 72. The Concord Standard Aid Package, activated and en route, would cover reconstruction costs, replacement supplies, temporary housing for displaced survivors. The machinery of humanitarian response, doing exactly what it was built to do, running exactly as designed. Keth looked at the numbers, at what had been lost and what had been saved, at the math of it. Then he looked at the numbers from the Velorian outpost incident 8 months ago. 0 survivors, convoy lost, no reconstruction, no replacement supplies. The math was not subtle. On the display above the status report, the Relentless turned slowly in Vethorin's orbit, running its expanded sensor sweeps, making sure. Still making sure. The ship that had not been asked to come and had come anyway, and whose presence had converted a total loss into a partial one, into a survivable one, into something the Conquered Aid Package could actually help with because there were people left to help. Chang, at the weapons station, was running system checks on his targeting arrays. He had fired his weapons in combat for the first time in 3 years of service. He looked like someone who had passed a test he hadn't been sure he was ready for. Osai was updating the xenobiology flagging on the Pale Choir entity, comprehensive file, full behavioral spectrum, recommendation for threat classification at the highest level. The file that the query 6 months ago should have generated. The file that would have, if the Conquered had built it then, given someone else the same preparation time the asterisk Relentless had used. Voss stood at her station and read the damage assessment. She did not look satisfied. She did not look relieved. She looked like someone checking their work. "Osai," she said, "flag the outer system. I want a watch buoy dropped at the edge of Vethoran's gravity well. If anything matching the choir's spectral signature approaches this system in the next 5 years, I want an alert." "Yes, Captain." "And send the full choir behavioral file to Concord Command. Threat assessment priority. Don't flag it low confidence. Flag it confirmed hostile." "They may reclassify it." "They may," Voss said. "Send it anyway." She turned, finally, from her display. She looked at Keth. He looked back at her. "How's your report coming?" she asked. "It is complete in its current form," Keth said. "I expect I will revise it several times before I submit it." She nodded. "That's honest." "Captain," he hesitated, "the review board will be difficult. You violated protocol, multiple protocols, the formal censure." "Will happen," she said. "Yes." "You don't seem concerned." 340 people are alive," she said. "I'm somewhat focused on that." She went back to her display. Keth stood in the middle of the bridge and held his report and thought about the difference between being concerned and being prepared, and whether those two things had to be the same, and concluded slowly that they did not. That was the thing, that was the whole thing. She was not unconcerned. She was simply done being concerned in the ways that didn't help anything, and concentrated entirely in the ways that did. He looked at his report. He started his first revision. The review board convened 18 days later at Concord Station, Hellier Prime. It was a formal chamber, large, cold, designed for the kind of proceedings where the architecture itself communicated gravity. The seating tiers accommodated 12 species comfortably and 6 more with adaptive furniture. The light was neutral and even, which meant it was slightly wrong for everyone. Keth had been in this chamber before. He had always found the universal discomfort to be a useful equalizer. Admiral Thal sat at the primary review panel. He was accompanied by 2 other senior Concord officers, a Valorian Rear Admiral named Sale and a Koreth logistics commander named Parath, who had never been to Vethoran and had been chosen for the board specifically because of that neutrality. Voss sat at the respondents' table with the Relentless's JAG officer, a human named Lieutenant Adebio who had the expression of someone confident in their position, and aware that confidence was not the same as outcome. Keth sat in the observer's gallery. He had submitted his report 6 days earlier. He had revised it 9 times. The charges were read in Concord formal language, which translated into something like: the *uns Relentless had jumped to Vethoran without authorization, had conducted ground operations without authorization, had engaged an unknown entity with weapons-grade force without authorization, and had used emergency ship systems in ways that were not covered under any existing operational protocol. All of this was technically correct. The board asked Voss to respond to each charge. To the first, "We jumped because the signal indicated an active threat, and 12 hours was too long to wait." To the second, "We went to the surface because the survivors needed to be counted, located, and extracted, and I was the only vessel present capable of doing it safely." To the third, "We engaged the Pale Choir because it was eating people." To the fourth, "The chief engineer developed an application for the hull discharge system in real time during active engagement. The alternative was hull breach. I authorized it." She said all of this in the same even tone, not defensive, not apologetic, just accurate. Thal looked at her for a moment after the last answer. "Captain Voss," he said, "do you believe that your actions were proportionate to the threat as you understood it?" "I believe 340 survivors is a proportionate outcome," she said. "The methods were whatever the methods needed to be. The Concord operates under the principle that aid operations should not be militarized, that humanitarian response and military force are." Separate categories, Voss said. Yes, I understand the principle. Do you disagree with it? A brief pause. Voss looked at the panel. She said, I disagree with it in contexts where the threat is not waiting for the distinction to be resolved. Thal wrote something. Sale wrote something. Pereth looked at Voss with an expression that Keth could not read from his seat in the gallery. Governor Yissel's testimony came next. She had insisted on testifying in person. The Concord had initially suggested a recorded deposition would suffice, and she had declined the suggestion in language that was formally polite and functionally immovable. She sat at the testimony stand in the same deliberate stillness that Keth had seen in her in the agricultural storage facility, the stillness of someone who had been inside something very bad and had come out of it having decided that certain things were worth saying regardless of who it inconvenienced. She told the board about the pale choir, about what it had done, about the rate of spread through the colony structures, about her synthesis of the chemical deterrent, which the Concord xenobiology team had, she noted, already requested the formula for, which she had already provided, which she found appropriate. Then she told them about the Valorian outpost. She had done research in the 18 days before the hearing. Not deep research, she had not been a researcher before the attack and the attack had not made her one. But she had looked for what was available and she had found the incident classification. Valorian outpost incident, 8 months prior. A Korath trading vessel had been in the area, had picked up a partial signal, had reported it to Concord monitoring. 0 survivors, convoy lost, file classified partial. I know what the convoy found, Yissel said, because I know what the pale choir does, and I know what a convoy without weapons is capable of doing against it, which is nothing. Thal said, the Concord convoy to the Valorian outpost was sent in good faith, Yissel said. I understand that. I am not here to criticize the Concord's intentions. I am here to tell you what I told the humans on that ship. I didn't think anyone would come with weapons. She paused. That is not a compliment to the humans. That is an indictment of the situation that made it true. The chamber was very quiet. 340 of my people are alive, Yissel said. 72 are impressions in walls that we will spend years trying to understand how to grieve. If the asterisk relentless had not jumped when it did, if it had waited for authorization, if it had waited for committee review, I know what the number would be. She looked at Thal. You know what the number would be too. She was not wrong. Nobody in the chamber disagreed with her. The disagreement, if there was one, was about something more complicated, about what it meant that she was right, and what the Concord was supposed to do with being right in a way that felt like failure. Voss's second turn at the stand was shorter. One question, Thal said, and I want a direct answer. Yes, Admiral. Did you believe the battle cruiser was necessary? Voss looked at him. She said, I believed that 340 people surviving was necessary. The ship was just the method. Thal looked at this answer for a moment. Then he looked at Voss. Then he looked at his notes. Thank you, Captain, he said. You may step down. The deliberation took 6 hours. Keth spent them in the station's common area, writing and deleting things in a personal document that he was not submitting anywhere. Thoughts he was having trouble organizing. Things he had seen in the last 18 days that he was trying to put into order. He had been in diplomatic service for 9 years. He had been assigned to the asterisk relentless as an observer, and he had observed. He had watched Voss listen to a fragment of sound 35 times, and then spend 6 months preparing for what the sound meant. He had watched Marines move through a damaged colony with patient and practiced care. He had watched Ramos carry an injured corporal, and then feed 300 survivors with the cheerful reliability of someone who simply believed that people needed feeding. He had watched the asterisk relentless perform a precision orbital strike, while simultaneously coordinating the largest successful evacuation in recent Concord history. He was trying to write down what he had learned. He kept arriving at the same place. The Relentless was not here because humans were violent. It was here because humans had decided that losing was not an acceptable outcome and had worked backward from that decision to determine what they needed to bring. That was the whole thing. That was what the galaxy hadn't understood. Every other species in the Conquered had evolved in environments that were, by comparison, comfortable. They had built civilizations around cooperation because cooperation was available to them. They had built aid convoys because aid was usually sufficient. They had built protocols and committees and review processes because, in most situations, pace was not the enemy. Humans had evolved on a world where pace was frequently the difference between alive and dead, and they had brought that knowledge with them into a galaxy that had not yet encountered anything that required it. Until now. The trouble was, now had been building for 8 months. The Pale Choir had attacked an outpost, had killed a convoy, had eaten a colony. It was not done. There was no particular reason to believe it was alone. There was every particular reason to believe that the Conquered, if it encountered the Choir again in a standard humanitarian operation, would lose the convoy and the people it was trying to reach. Keth wrote, "The question the board is asking is whether the Relentless acted appropriately. The question the galaxy should be asking is what happens next time, and whether we will be any more prepared." He looked at this. He sent it to Thal's personal channel as an addendum to his formal report. He did not know if it would matter. He sent it anyway. The board reconvened at 1900. Thal read the finding. The Relentless had acted in violation of Conquered Protocol 7 Alpha, 12 Gamma, and 31 Epsilon. The violations were documented. A formal censure would be issued and recorded. Captain Voss and her crew were ordered to undergo a full operational review before their next deployment. Voss received this without expression. Adebio next to her wrote something down. Then Thal said, "The board also wishes to note, for the record, that the outcome at Vethorin represents the successful preservation of 340 lives against a threat for which Conquered humanitarian protocol provided no adequate response. The board recommends the immediate classification of the Pale Choir entity as a Class 1 hostile threat. The distribution of Captain Voss's tactical analysis to all Conquered military commands, and the formation of a working group to review humanitarian convoy protocols in the context of unknown active threat environments." He paused. He looked at Voss. "The censure stands," he said. "The recommendation stands also." Voss said, "Understood, Admiral, thank you." Thal looked at her for a moment with an expression that Keth's Velorian perceptual system, finely tuned for the nuance of faces that were not built for honesty, read as something like, "I know what you did was right and I can't say that, and we both know I can't say that, and you're not going to make me say it, and I am. In some way I'm not prepared to examine, grateful for that." He said nothing further. The chamber began to clear. Ramos was in the corridor outside the chamber when Keth came out. He was there with a large number of Koreth survivors from Vethorin, which was not surprising. Keth had learned that large numbers of Vethorin survivors had followed the Relentless to Hellier Prime, apparently unwilling to be very far from the ship until they had some better framework for processing what had happened. What was surprising was the number of people in the corridor who were not Korath. A group of Velorian crew members from Conquered Station, 3 of the Merindian officers from Thal's fleet, 2 humans from one of the medical frigates who had been present at the Vethorin survivor transfer. Ramos was sharing food. This was all he was doing. He had a container of something and he was moving through the corridor handing pieces of it to whoever would take one, talking to people whose languages he didn't speak and not needing the translator because the transaction did not require words. "Food. Thank you. Sit here if you want." Keth watched this for a moment. He thought about what it meant that this man had, in the 48 hours of the Vethoran operation, turned the ship's engineering bay into an informal refuge for hundreds of traumatized people, and had apparently decided that this was simply part of his job. He thought about what it meant that nobody had assigned him this task. He thought about what it meant that in 9 years of diplomatic service, he had been in rooms with a great many highly trained professionals who were explicitly assigned to make people feel cared for, and he could not immediately name one who was better at it than this engineer who was standing in a corridor outside a review chamber distributing food without ceremony or agenda. Ramos saw him. "Keth," he said, "you want something? I've got." He looked at the container. "Whatever this is, one of the Korath survivors made it. I've eaten worse." Keth took a piece. He ate it. It was good. "How's the captain?" Ramos asked. Censured, Keth said. "Also correct." Ramos nodded. "Yeah, that tracks." He offered food to a passing Merindian officer who looked surprised and then took some. "She won't care about the censure." "I know," Keth said. "She'll care about the working group, the protocol review." Ramos looked at the container. "That's the part that actually matters. That's the part that means the next convoy going somewhere with an unknown entity on the ground goes with something real." "You think the review will produce that?" Ramos shrugged. "Depends on what they're willing to admit." He looked up. "Thal's not stupid. He knows what he saw. He knows what his fleet couldn't do." A pause. "People have a hard time admitting they weren't prepared. Different thing from being unprepared. Unprepared just means you didn't have the right stuff. Not prepared means you didn't believe you needed it. Second one's harder to say out loud." Keth looked at him. "You have thought about this?" "Long flight home," Ramos said. "Lot of time to think." Voss came out of the chamber 40 minutes after the hearing ended. She stopped when she saw the corridor, the gathered survivors, Ramos moving through them, the unlikely collection of species sitting in clusters and eating something a Korath survivor had made. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she walked to Ramos and said, "Adebio says the censure goes on record for 2 years and then can be reviewed." "Yep," Ramos said. "The working group convenes next month." "That's good." "I'm supposed to submit a full tactical report on the choir to the working group before their first session." "You've already written it," Ramos said. "It was not a question." "First draft," Voss said. He handed her food. She ate it standing up. "How are they?" she asked. She meant the survivors, specific without needing to gesture. "Better than yesterday," Ramos said. "Not good, better." She nodded. She ate. Then she went to find Yissel, who was sitting against the corridor wall with the 12 survivors from agricultural storage, the ones who had spent the worst hours in the smallest space with the worst options, and she sat down on the floor next to the Korath governor without ceremony or announcement, and she said, "How are you doing?" Yissel looked at her. "Not well," Yissel said. "Better than 2 days ago." "That's the direction," Voss said. They sat for a moment in silence that was not empty. It had the quality of silence between people who have been in the same bad place and don't need to describe it. "The censure," Yissel said. "I'm sorry, I know it." "Don't," Voss said. "That's not yours." "I know, I'm still sorry." Voss was quiet for a moment. Then, "The working group is going to review convoy protocols. The choir file is going to every conquered military command." And she paused. "I understand there's a classified infrastructure proposal being drafted by Conquered Command. I don't have the details." Yissel looked at her. "What kind of proposal?" "The kind that costs a significant amount of funding and requires the authorization of the full Conquered Security Committee," Voss said. "That's all I know." She said it in the flat tone of someone who had heard exactly that and nothing more. She did not speculate. She ate her food. Keth filed his final report that evening. It was the 9th revision, and it was substantially different from the first. The first had been about violations and protocols and the proper procedures for observer documentation of unauthorized military action. The ninth was about something else. He submitted it. He sat for a while. Then he opened a different document and wrote a personal addendum, not for the record, for himself. I was assigned to the asterisk relentless as a corrective measure, a reminder to humans that the conquered has authority and that authority has process and process is not optional. I was there to observe and document violations. I documented them. They are in the record. I also documented 340 people who are alive. Those are also in the record. The question I cannot stop asking is not whether the captain followed protocol. The question is whether protocol in this situation would have followed the survivors. I do not think it would have. This is not a comfortable conclusion for someone who has spent 9 years believing in protocol. I believe in it still. I believe the conquered, at its best, builds the framework that lets species share a galaxy without destroying each other. I believe in medical frigates and food transports and humanitarian aid and working groups and review processes. I believe all of this. I also believe that somewhere in the galaxy right now there are things that don't know what a working group is, and that when they arrive at a colony, the colony needs something real. The asterisk relentless was something real. He stopped. Then, at the bottom, he wrote what he had been composing for several days in his head, the request he had already decided to submit, but had been organizing the language for. I hereby request permanent assignment as diplomatic liaison to the UNSS Relentless or equivalent Deathworlder crewed vessel. My reasons, translated as accurately as possible from Valorian into Conquered Standard, are as follows. I want to be present for what is coming. I want to be somewhere that is prepared for it. I have seen what prepared looks like, and I understand now that it does not look the way I expected. Prepared looks like a woman eating a ration bar during a weapons engagement. Prepared looks like an engineer with schematics already open before the captain asks the question. Prepared looks like a ship that nobody asked to come, that came anyway, that counted its people before it arrived. I want to be where that is. He submitted it. He did not expect an immediate answer. He got one anyway 3 hours later from a human administrative officer who apparently kept unusual hours, a single line, request under review. Voss has been informed. She said, and I am quoting directly, fine. 2 weeks after the review board, Conquered Command passed a classified infrastructure resolution. Keth did not have access to it. He heard about it the way people hear about things they don't have access to in pieces from people who had pieces. A resolution, significant funding, Conquered Security Committee authorization, 3 vessels. Goliath class. 3 more. The Conquered never announced it publicly. The official position remained that the Conquered operated under humanitarian principles and did not militarize aid operations, and the censure of the asterisk relentless stood on record and would be reviewed in 2 years. The Conquered also built 3 battle cruisers. They still wouldn't say humans had been right. They just started building what humans build. The Relentless left Hellier Prime on a Tuesday, which was a human calendar designation that meant nothing to most of the galaxy and everything to the humans aboard, who had their own systems for marking time, and held to them the way species hold to the things they carried from home. Keth was on the bridge when they left. He had a small bag he packed efficiently, as Valorian physiology required, and a new assignment, and a report that was already generating significant discussion in Conquered diplomatic circles. Voss was at her station. She was reading the tactical file on the Pale Choir's dispersal mechanics, not for the first time. For what Keth estimated was approximately the 47th time, though he had lost count. She looked up when he came in. "Welcome back," she said. "Thank you, Captain." She went back to her file. He went to the observer station and sat down and opened his working documents and prepared to observe. Ramos appeared in the doorway with 2 cups. "Coffee," he said. Keth had decided 18 days ago that he did not like coffee. He took the cup anyway. It was terrible. He drank it. Outside the viewport, the stars were very bright and very many, and somewhere in the vast space between them, things were moving that the galaxy had not catalogued yet, that no aid convoy was built to stop, that no protocol covered and no committee had authorized a response to. And the Relentless pointed itself at them anyway. Because that was what it was built for. Because someone, a long time ago, on a high-gravity rock that spent 4 billion years trying to be lethal, had learned that the only reasonable response to an unreasonable universe was to be more prepared than it expected. The ship went to FTL. The stars restructured themselves around it. The galaxy went on.